This week, from Europe and Africa to Asia and North America, millions fleeing their homes in the face of war, persecution and human rights violations. Why is the world's refugee crisis only getting worse? Also, US President Joe Biden came to office promising to fix America's refugee system. Just over 2 years in, what has he accomplished? And are the president's plan for a better immigration system working? Straight Talk Africa starts now. $110 million. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that's how many people have had to flee their homes because of conflict, persecution, discrimination, or human rights violations. Hello there and welcome to Straight Talk Africa. I'm Haydé Adams. It's so great to be with you. The UNHCR says the wars in Ukraine and Sudan have made an existing global refugee crisis worse. The refugee agency expects close to 1 million people to flee Sudan by October, most of them to neighboring countries like the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia and South Sudan. But many of these nations have their own problems with people displaced by conflict who face food insecurity and instability. Henry Wilkins reports for us from Barota, Chad, on what Sudanese refugees face in their host communities.
16-year-old Haydé Adams says one morning in May he rode his bike down to this patch of ground on the outskirts of Barota, a Chadian town about 5 kilometres from the Sudan border. He saw thousands of Sudanese refugees arriving.
People ran away and came over here, but there is no food or drinking water, no decent food, no clothing.
Some 425,000 refugees have now fled to neighbouring countries because of Sudan's civil war. But many of their host countries face their own conflicts and are struggling to feed their own people amid skyrocketing food prices and inflation. Experts and aid groups say Sudanese refugees face far from certain futures in host countries, including the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea and Egypt. The mayor of Barota, Toko Bahat, says the community has done what it can to welcome the refugees.
In Barota, the people are from a mix of places like Conga and Porto. They know one another. They are like siblings since they come from the same families or tribes. So there is no problem in living together.
Similarly, in South Sudan, many of those fleeing Sudan are South Sudanese returnees. However, 2/3 of South Sudan's population already faces food insecurity and instability in rank, where many refugees have arrived.
The difference with South Sudan compared to perhaps Chad or Egypt is that the majority of people who are coming across the border are returnees. Communities are quite welcoming, and of course we hope that continues. The pressure that this is putting on markets, on the humanitarian response, is definitely going to be difficult for humanitarian agencies and the government.
Most Sudanese refugees, more than 170,000, have fled to Egypt in recent weeks. Egypt's currency has been devalued by 50% against the dollar in the last year, while food prices have risen by 60%. The Central African Republic, where around 14,000 refugees have arrived, has been embroiled in a civil war for more than 10 years, and security is dire. Ethiopia, where thousands of refugees have fled, is recovering from a civil war that ended in November. Eritrea has been accused of forcibly turning away refugees attempting to flee Sudan's fighting. On a visit to Egypt in late May, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees commended Egypt for helping Sudan's refugees, but said we urgently need to mobilise more resources to help them to maintain this generosity. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Barota, Chad.
Well, joining me now to discuss the refugee crisis unfolding from the fighting in Sudan, and she's joining me from Nairobi in Kenya, is Faith Kasina. She's the regional spokesperson for the United Nations Refugee Agency. Faith, a warm welcome to Straight Talk Africa. According to the UNHCR, around 30 million internally displaced persons, refugees and asylum seekers live in Africa. I mean, that's nearly 1/3 of the world's refugee population. And we've just seen in our previous story what things are like in Chad alone. But how are other surrounding countries that surround Sudan, how are they dealing with what is unfolding in that nation?
Thank you so much, Haydé, for the opportunity to speak on this important subject. As you rightly said, there's been hundreds of thousands of people who have now fled Sudan. I think yesterday you may have seen the announcement or the alert that our High Commissioner, Filippo Grandi, put out, stating that sadly now we're looking at 500,000 people who fled Sudan into neighboring countries in search of safety. Now that's a huge number. And as you say, most of them are arriving in countries that are neighboring Sudan. You've listed them down as Chad, South Sudan, Egypt, Central African Republic. And the reality is that the situation, as you have seen in Chad, it's not different in other neighboring countries. It's sadly the same. We're seeing people arriving in very remote locations, locations that have very little infrastructure, very little access to basic services. And here are thousands of people arriving daily into places where they are completely dependent on humanitarian assistance to survive, essentially. And therefore, it's been very challenging. In a country like South Sudan, for example, the rainy season has also begun, just as in Chad, which obviously just makes it extremely difficult for humanitarian agencies such as UNHCR to be able to reach affected populations, people who are coming in from Sudan, areas that don't have roads, and therefore we have to rely on air transport to flying, everything in terms of support, which is extremely expensive. And therefore, the situation is quite dire at the moment.
Faith, now from your experience, I mean, when conflict breaks out and we see people having to flee their homes, I mean, those are images that for those of us watching from the outside, those are images that stay with you. I mean, that's not even talking about what it actually feels like to be the one having to flee your home. But in your experience, how often do people get the chance to actually return home? I mean, once someone becomes a refugee, do they tend to remain one and displaced for most or the rest of their lives?
I mean, the sad fact is that not many refugees have the opportunities to return home, sadly. As you began in saying that Africa has continued to host millions of forcibly displaced populations, including refugees, a huge percentage have not been able to return home. Mostly because some of the situations that forced them to flee in the beginning are still persistent. In cases where there's protracted violence and conflicts in different countries, where people continually have to flee their homes and seek asylum and safety in neighboring countries. There are beacons of hope, good examples where people have been able to return, such as in Burundi. Since 2017, more than 200,000 people, Burundians who were refugees in neighboring countries, have been able to return back to their country in Burundi because there's been some level of stability, some peace and opportunities for people to go back and rebuild and restart their lives. But there are not many people, refugees, who have that opportunity or have that chance, and therefore majority of these populations are then left in limbo, stuck in displacement for many, years and years, living as refugees and not being able to go back home.
Faith, we saw the UNHCR chief, Filippo Grandi, urging Sudan's neighboring countries to please keep their borders open, despite the security concerns that these countries have. What are those concerns about? And also, do you see an uptick in willingness or hesitance from neighboring countries in Africa to take in people from conflict zones that just happen to be around them?
So in the case of Sudan, we've continued to see a lot of generosity that must be uploaded by the neighboring countries who have continued to keep their borders open, countries themselves who have existing large populations of refugees and displaced populations themselves, also with ongoing humanitarian situations that also are significantly underfunded. So a complex mix of a situation where, new arrivals from Sudan are finding themselves coming into, yet these countries have welcomed them with open arms and provided the safety and the international protection that people fleeing Sudan have required. But the reality is that, as I mentioned, these are countries that do not have the resources that they need, not only to sustain the humanitarian situations ongoing in their own countries, but also to welcome new refugees and new families, individuals arriving from Sudan. These are countries that have had populations of refugees who have been living in their own country for years, and it has been difficult and very challenging to support these families, not only to provide immediate or basic life-saving assistance, but to also provide what we call the durable solutions, enabling them to live dignified lives even in the situation of displacement. The situation is that many refugees have very limited access to basic services like healthcare, quality education. Many of them have very limited opportunities to earn an income, meaningfully and gainfully be employed, and therefore earn an income and sustain themselves and rely less on humanitarian assistance. So it's again a complex mix of a situation where we find there's a lot of generosity from neighboring countries who continue to welcome refugees, but really do not have the resources, they don't have the support that we keep on calling the international community to step up their support for these countries so that they're able to continue to host refugees.
Well, this is certainly a disturbing situation, but we thank you, Faith Kasina, for walking us through all of it. Faith is in Nairobi, Kenya, and she is the regional spokesperson for the United Nations, UNHCR. Thank you so much for your time, Faith. Now, we asked refugees living in Uganda about their experiences and the challenge they face. Here's what they told us.
My name is Ayoka Ben, and I'm from South Sudan. I've been staying in Uganda for the past decade and more, actually. My family decided to come here after the situation which started in South Sudan. Some of the challenges, I think, would have to come with discrimination, because some people have refused to accept this change, accept us into their community, and try to believe that not all of us are warmongers and not all of us want to harm them or steal their things.
My name is Mamadou Ahmad. I am from Somalia, especially Mogadishu. I came here end of the 2002. So the people in Kampala, they are very friendly and humble. They were very welcoming me when I came here. So I wanted to thank how they are welcoming me. Now, Alhamdulillah, I understand everyone living here.
My name is Rahel, and I've been there in Uganda for 7 months. It's hard to find some work for the youth, especially for Eritreans and Ethiopians. It's hard to find work. It would be nice if some opportunity would be given for the youth.
By the names of Bill Gabriel Joshua, I am from South Sudan. So basically, the journey that I've been having here in Uganda, it started all the way from 2013. I came here after the war. The journey has been tough. Nobody can say that the journey is always simple, it's always tough. So we came in here, we got knowledge, we tried to make a living out of it, and we thank God for that. We are so grateful about that.
Refugees in Uganda speaking to us there. Well, still ahead here on Straight Talk Africa. US President Joe Biden came into office promising to fix America's refugee system. What has he actually accomplished so far? And why are some Nigerians in America asking the Biden administration for temporary protected status? My guests are standing by. We'll have more for you after the break.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain, and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
From around the world. Let's go.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Aline Barros, in Washington every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're with Straight Talk Africa. Welcome back. US President Joe Biden came into office just over 2 years ago, promising to fix America's refugee system. He said he would undo the immigration restrictions of the Trump era and create a system that is, as he put it, fairer and more humane. Part of his plan would be to allow more new immigrants into the US while giving millions of unauthorized immigrants who are already in the country a path to legal status. Well, according to Pew Research Center, roughly 1 million unauthorized immigrants have temporary permission to live and work in the US through the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, and Temporary Protected Status, or TPS programs. So has President Biden made good on his immigration reform promises? We also want to explore why some Nigerians want the US president to give them temporary protected status. Well, I'm joined here in studio by VOA's immigration reporter Aline Barros, and Gbenga Ogunjimi is the founder of the Nigerian Center here in Washington, D.C. Aline and Gbenga, a warm welcome to Straight Talk Africa for both of you. Great to have you both here. And Aline, I want to start with you. Of course, US immigration is part of your beat. From what you've seen and what you've heard from asylum seekers, from refugees, and from policymakers, has President Biden, on the main, made good on his promise to fix America's refugee program?
So the refugee program has started coming from a 15,000 ceiling refugee cap. So as soon as he came in the office, he set that ceiling to 125,000. The country hasn't been able to reach to that point, but yesterday USCIS officials held a public meeting where they said that they were excited and they were optimistic that the numbers are increasing. So they have already had about 41,000 applications, people that they've interviewed, that they're going through the pipeline. And this is for the fiscal year 2023, which is, we still have time right until September. Last year, they've done about 44,000. So they're optimistic that they are going to approve more people and welcome more people into the United States.
Gbenga, you're the founder of the Nigerian Center. You work with immigrants, including refugees, of course, from many places. Given the state of America's immigration system as a whole, where does this leave the people who tend to come to you for help?
Well, the Nigerian Center has been very vocal and active, calling this administration to deliver on its promises to reform the immigration. and extend the same level of opportunities, extend to other parts of the world, to Nigeria. And that is why we are advocating for immigration benefits such as TPS. We currently have at the center opportunities for folks to come in to have immigration, education, representation, counseling, but we think this administration extending equal opportunities, extend to other parts of the world, to Nigerians, to Africa, will really put our community on the path of realizing the American dream.
So in your view, has the president delivered on his immigration promises?
Well, I think there's a progression that has been recognized towards delivering on that. But what I would say is we African immigrants, we don't think we are fully tapped into the same level of opportunities others have. So we think there's still some imbalances when it comes to affording us the same level of opportunity and, quite frankly, the same level of humanity afforded to other parts of the world. So I give an example. So there is TPS, for example, that is very across the country. Afghanistan, Ukraine, folks from Ukraine, folks from South America. But when it comes to African communities, countries, we don't always see approval for TPS. So we are calling on this administration. They have started, we just say, follow through and extend the same level of opportunities to our own community.
And we're going to get into that a little more. Aline, the immigration and refugee issue, as we're going into a new election here in the United States, I mean, that's a hot button issue. We call it, we would say here, there are immigration promises. Republicans will call this an immigration crisis, because when, just on the face of it, when you look at the numbers, there is definitely a problem at the southern border. Do people still see the United States as a safe haven to come? People, these are refugees from around the world, given the mood, the attitude, and the politics in this country?
So to answer that question, I'll give you two quick parts. At the U.S.-Mexico border, we have asylum seekers. We have people who are arriving there asking for safety. Some of them are running away from persecution. Some of them are running away from just violence or economic issues in their country. So they get there and they want to present themselves. They wanted to come to an officer and say, hey, I need help. Most of them are not able to. So what this current administration has done was put some asylum restrictions at the border. They are allowing a certain number of people to apply for parole program, which allows you to come to the United States and work for 2 years. And then from there, usually the immigrant has to figure it out a way to adjust status. But if you get to the border and you don't apply for asylum in the previous traveled country, you will not be allowed in. There are some exceptions, but that's basically what's happening at the border. We did get numbers yesterday from the May CBP encounters, and it was about 169 people that CBP officers encountered along the border. It is a decrease from last year of about 25%. So the program that the Biden administration has implemented, some people are looking for it and some people are applying. You need a sponsor in the United States, so that's one of the biggest issues that asylum seekers are encountering. On the refugee side, the program where people have to apply and come through the refugee program, there has been more, USCIS has hired more people in different countries. They said yesterday about 75 countries, people from 75 countries, the applications that they have approved yet. So there is a continuous work with advocates, resettlement agencies, and the administration. But advocates, they are pushing for more family reunification. They do not like the asylum restrictions at the border. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving pieces. And it is going to be interesting to see, with the litigation going on by the ACLU on the asylum restrictions, what's actually going to happen and how the administration will respond to all the moving parts, not only in the refugee side, but in the asylum side at the border.
Because the president is obviously on his way to the end of his first term, so this will become even more pressing. Gbenga, we spoke earlier about temporary protected status, which Nigerians in the United States, some at least, are asking the Biden administration to grant them. On what grounds are Nigerians asking for TPS?
So the reason why this coalition of close to 130 human rights organizations petitioned Biden administration for TPS is for over a decade, Nigeria has been in an active armed conflict of Boko Haram. The United States government has designated Boko Haram as a terrorist group. The State Department, Amnesty International, all human rights organizations have recognized there's an active armed conflict happening in Nigeria. Even in Nigeria, over 2 million people are internally displaced. And the requirement for TPS is simple. When there is an active armed conflict in a country, the Secretary of Homeland Security has the power to grant such a country TPS. We are not asking for anything that is not in the books or something exclusive to Nigerians. We are saying across the world where there are armed conflicts, the United States government is very swift to respond with immigration protection. So we are saying there's an opportunity to save lives, and the ground is the active armed conflict happening in Nigeria.
Aline, another hot button issue is the one around DACA, of course. Very briefly, tell us a little bit more about DACA and what the status is of it. And just for our viewers, this is, of course, was a presidential initiative by former President Barack Obama to give protection to people who were brought to the United States as children who are undocumented. They're called the Dreamers. What's the status of DACA right now?
So DACA has gone through different litigations. Right now, the latest one is in the hands of a Texas judge, a federal judge, and he has heard arguments. Both sides have said why. It's Republican-led states who are pretty much asking the judge to say, look, this is not legal. We want to terminate the program. The program is not good for the Republican-led states. On the other hand, you have advocates saying we have hundreds of thousands of people who are contributing to the United States. There has been studies where DACA recipients have actually contributed millions of dollars to the economy. So you have those two sides arguing in court. We don't know when the Texas judge will come out and give his decision. Based on what immigration advocates and lawyers have told me, they expect that the judge will agree with the Republican-led states and that the case is going to go to the appeals court and eventually to the Supreme Court. This is going to take some time, more than a year easily, so we don't expect any decision right now. But DACA, people who have DACA right now can only renew their status. No new applications are being allowed right now. And it's a program that does not lead to permanent residency or citizenship, just like TPS. So it's definitely just a temporary protection.
Well, we'll watch developments around these issues, but I do thank you, Aline Barros and Gbenga Ogunjimi, for joining me here in studio. And of course, that is where we will leave it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us on TV, radio, and online. Remember to follow us on social media. It was great to be with you. From all of us here on Straight Talk Africa, until next time, it's goodbye.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America,